So good day, everyone. So welcome to the continuation of our discussion on intercultural communication. So last meeting we discussed the concept of culture, and I introduced to you the different characteristics of culture and how we look at culture from various point of views. So this time, what I'll be tackling is communication as a component of culture. So just a sneak preview. So we often observe, why do Americans place such high value on punctuality? In the Philippines, we have the so-called Filipino time, di ba? And many cultures would find arriving at a very specific time quite strange, utterly obsessive, absurd, and valueless, never stopping to smell the roses. Parang ganun, di ba? So, kasi that's how much they, figuratively speaking, um, in short, it seems just as normal and right to the Japanese, for the Italians, and from other countries to act the way they do, as it does to you to do what you do. It only implicates na there are some instances wherein we do not value much time, especially in the Philippines, while other countries giving much value to it. So when you are now having a, let's say, a meeting with people coming from other nations, and they are very much particular of the time, and then and you came late, so it gives them already a bad impression. So if you're not very much particular of uh, of their culture, it might lead you to losing the chance or the opportunity to close a deal with these people because you came late. And although in the Philippines, we still consider, even though the person came late, we still consider them. But in other country, they are very much particular to it, because sabi nila, if you cannot respect my time, you're not also respecting me, something like that. Okay, so in Japan, for instance, again, it is impolite to someone or to call someone with the moving index finger, yung moving index finger mo, as is done in the West to mean come here, di ba? We say come here, di ba? In the Western, we consider this one as okay lang. But in Japan, you should hold your palm facing forward and move all your fingers at once, something like this. Okay, so it is disrespectful for them if you will call a Japanese this way. It doesn't look good on their end. But if instead they would rather want you to do this thing, because it looks more respectful on their end. So what does it mean to belong to a culture? The defining element is that you belong to a set of people who share meanings and styles of speaking, systems of beliefs, and customs. So if you come from a different culture and you're not very much particular with them, it is your responsibility to really observe the way they act, the way they speak, the way they get along with others. And because the moment that you visited their their area or their country, so you are responsible to share meanings and styles of speaking with them, in order for you to avoid being um to avoid the miscommunication. So you live your life in the context of a communicating set of individuals who transact a universe of thought. So when we talk of universe of thought, it means that um, even though you're telling something to them, there's really a need for you to get along with them. You really need to understand their way of life, their their approaches when dealing with them. So, and the behavior that makes possible certain ways of treating other people. So discipline, if you are in other country, discipline, or you're communicating with others coming from different culture, discipline is very important. You really need to discipline yourself by understanding their own culture. You know what? Some of the Asian countries, let's say China, Japan, and Korean, they really like it when they are greeted using their language. You know, when you are talking to them and then you greeted them using their own language, iba yung dating sa kanila, because for them, if you are respecting their own language, it's also a way of getting a good impression towards them, di ba? Parang ano lang yan eh. Sa atin sa Pilipinas, minsan kapag yung ibang taga-ibang bansa binati tayo sa wika natin, di ba natutuwa tayo? So ganun din yung impression sa kanila na kapag binati natin sila using their language, it gives them a good impression. So the structure and discipline of society exert their force through communication and impose beliefs on people through collective values. So in order to look more of that, so let's take note of what Lebaran said. So sabi niya, all communication is cultural. Because again, culture is created through set of communication. It draws on ways people have learned to speak and give nonverbal messages. What we communicate and what we communicate with others, it could be verbal or nonverbal, and majority are utilizing that way of speaking or the way of talking, the way of using that kind of gestures. Many are using it already. Therefore, you are already creating set of practices, set of beliefs that later on can now be considered as a culture. If that becomes the habit of every individuals, whenever they are communicating in a particular society, that is already a way of saying that culture is beginning to be created. So people do not always communicate the same way from day to day since factors like context. So magkakaiba kasi tayo ng mga understanding of what others is saying. Yun yung context. So let's say, yung eye-to-eye contact. Ang context natin ng eye-to-eye contact is respect. Pero sa ibang bansa, ang konteksto nila ng eye-to-eye contact is disrespectful. Ang konteksto ng handshake sa atin, impluensya kasi ng mga Amerikano is respect. Pero sa ibang bansa, may mga Asian countries na kapag they do not prefer handshake because for them, it's not appropriate. Diba? So, iba yung konteksto nila doon. So, may iba naman na yung bow, pagbow, let's say sa mga Koreans, may Japanese, may meaning ang pagbabaw. Yung pagbabaw na yan, may level yan. So, kapag ikaw ay of the same status kayo, konting bend lang. Pero kapag magkaiba kayo ng status sa buhay o sa lipunan, mas mababa yung pagbabaw mo. So, iba-iba ng konteksto. And even individual personality, kahit pa sabihin natin na ito yung kultura ninyo, pero kapag iba naman yung personality ng tao, kahit pa sabihin natin ay galing siya sa isang kultura na very conservative, pero iba yung personality niya, it also affects it. Kung let's say nagkamali ka, nag-handshake ka sa kanya, which is disrespectful sa bansa nila, pero okay lang sa kanya. Kasi para sa kanya, it doesn't matter. Iba kasi yung personality niya. But others na galing sa isang conservative country, siguro it might result to something else. And even the mood to interact is also one way. Kapag wala talaga siya sa mood, kahit pa gumamit ka ng tamang way of greeting the person, kapag wala talaga siya sa mood, it might lead to misunderstanding. So, it happens with a variety of cultural influences. People have internalized that influence their choices. So, next, communication is interactive. We know that communication is interactive. An important influence on its effectiveness is people's relationship with others. So, if there is a good relationship with other people, then it becomes more comfortable on your end to communicate with them. However, there are some people wherein the cause of the conflict is because of the problems with the way the person communicate with others. So even with all the goodwill in the world, miscommunication is likely to happen. Totoo yan. Kahit pa sabihin natin na napakabuti mo, napakabait mo, ayos mo naman magsalita, pero there oftentimes it might lead to miscommunication. And if we cannot not communicate without communication, also the same thing with we cannot not avoid miscommunication because it always happens. And the least thing that we can do is just to minimize the effect, minimize the result or the outcome of being miscommunicated. So the least thing that we can do is not to aggravate the outcome. So miscommunication, just like what I mentioned, lead to conflict or aggravate conflict that already exists. Mas pwede pang lumala. So, kung communication ang cause ng misunderstanding, communication din ang magbabalik para maayos lahat. Thus, we say communication and culture are two interrelated social concepts. Two interrelated social concepts. Why? Because human beings are interrelating with one another. As we communicate with others, we are communicating our own culture. So every time people communicate, culture is part of the very fabric of their thought. So kapag mayroon kang kausap, a part of your life is also already communicated with others. Let's say, yung way of speaking mo to other people that was influenced by the culture where you're coming from is already shared to others through communication. Um, the nature of culture and your connection to society is conducted through the specific relationships you have with other individuals whom you meet fairly, frequently, and with whom you interact daily. So from this point of view, then you can think of culture meaning, as a meaning system. So the more that you interact with others, or with that someone, the more that there's a tendency that you will be adopting that. Okay, that's the relationship of communication and culture. You shared, as you communicate, you are sharing what you have adapted from your own culture. And as you communicate, you are also, as you are receiving information or communication from others, you are also adapting how others communicated to you. So ganun lang yan, parang vice versa. So we say from the words we utter and from the gesture we present in the way of saying those words and expressing those mannerisms, others can tell how well tailored a person is on a certain culture. So the way we communicate, sasabihin nila, ganyan pala mga Pilipino. Ganyan pala yung mga Amerikano. So parang we are, as we communicate with them, we are now sharing who we are. And because of generalizations, nakikita nila na baka ganito rin yung mga Pilipino. Kapag pangit yung pinakita mo sa kanila, isipin nila lahat ng Pilipino, gano'n na rin. Yun yung problem. That might result to miscommunication or that would aggravate the conflict. So, without communication and communication media per se, it would be impossible to preserve and pass along cultural characteristics from one place and time to another. Kasi nga, culture is shared. Culture is created, shaped, transmitted, and learned through communication. Okay? So, with the different culture that we have, what then are the challenges with the way we communicate? Kasi iba-iba tayo na pinanggalingan. Ano na ngayon dapat nating tingnan ngayon? So, we have to look at the different styles of communicating. As someone communicating to other culture, you really need to understand the words and phrases, that words and phrases are used in different ways. For example, yes may mean maybe or even definitely, even in different English-speaking countries. Okay, so you really need to look at the context. Ano ba yung gusto niyo sabihin? Kapag may sinabi na, do you want me to pursue this? Yes. Yes. Pero from the sounds of it, baka ibang yes ang gusto niya sabihin or could be maybe or it could be definitely, we don't know. Okay, so it's your responsibility to understand the different styles of communicating. Just like yung lagi kong example nga is yung eye contact. Minsan, bakit kaya hindi na seal yung deal? Ano kaya naging problem? Bakit kaya nagkaroon ng bad impression towards me? Yung kausap kong nagaling sa ibang bansa. Ano kaya ang dahilan? Because it might be the different styles of communicating. 'Di ba? Siguro yung way natin na pagiging straightforward, na mabilis magsalita, or sometimes yung way of speaking natin, if we're talking to, let's say, Japanese businessmen or entrepreneurs or Korean entrepreneurs from some other nations, gusto nila yung makita nila sa personality mo yung pagiging not only just confident, pero nandoon yung low profile, yung pagiging humble. Merong ganun na yung personality mo, tinitingnan nila. Okay? So ayaw nila yung masyadong aggressive. Okay? So, kaya kung ayaw nila yung ganon na way of speaking, so you really have to adjust yung pagiging magalang mo pa rin kapag nagsasalita. Okay? So, pansinin nyo sa Miss International. Okay? During the speech round, yung last part na ng competition, pansinin mo paano magsalita yung mga contestants sa pageant as they delivered their speech. Kasi most of the judges there are Japanese. So the way they speak, mahinahon, magalang, mayumi, binibini. Bakit? Kasi ganun tingnan nila yung mga Japanese women. They have to be mayumi. They have to be banayad lang magsalita. Kaya kaya yung mga contestants doon sa Miss International, ganun sila magsalita. Okay? Malumanay. May pagkamayumi. Because that's the image that the organization would like from someone who coming from different, although galing sila sa ibang kultura, pero gusto nila makita na yun, personality mo ay nagsaswak doon sa personality ng organization. So, binabago nilang different styles of communicating. Next, different attitudes regarding conflict. Conflict is considered positive in some countries, while people in others seek to avoid it. Although conflict is not usually desired in the US, people here are encouraged to deal directly with conflicts that arise. In many Eastern countries, differences are best worked out in private. So, let's say sa atin, mayroon tayong kultura na, sige, let's solve this conflict among us. Or are we just going to solve the conflict directly to the organization itself. So may mga ganong iba't ibang mga ways or attitudes regarding solving the conflict. Ano ba yung mga conflict na yan? Yung mga simpleng miscommunication that leads to aggravating the conflict. Competing tasks in different ways. Are you into more of quality over quantity or quantity over quality? Or are you more of finishing things one at a time or finishing things at the same time? So we don't know. So aalamin mo kung ano yung habit or kultura ng isang bansa, kung paano sila trumabaho. Gusto ba nila yung step-by-step procedure o kung gusto nila yung anything goes. Basta matapos mo yan, parang are they quality oriented or are they output oriented? Are they after with the numbers of things that you have accomplished? So cultural differences account for how people move to complete tasks. So reasons include different resource availability, different notions of time, and different ideas of how relationship building and task-oriented work should fit together. So next is differences in decision making. So in the US, decisions are frequently delegated to a subordinate. So in many Southern European and Latin American countries, holding decision-making responsibilities to oneself is valued. In a group situation, majority rule tends to work in the US, while consensus is the preference in Japan. So that may consensus. So sa atin sa Philippines, it's either democratic or autocratic way. That depends. So alamin nyo kung ang decision-making ba nila is democratic, wherein they are considering every opinions of the others, or are they into autocratic? So kung sino yung pinakang boss, siya yung magde-decide. So you really need to understand that. Next, difference in attitudes toward disclosure. So expressing, when we talk of disclosure, ito yung you're expressing your emotions about something. So expressing emotions, reasons behind a conflict or personal information may be taboo in some cultures. So merong iba, they restricting kung ano ba yung nararamdaman nila, or they are more of just show what you feel. Tell them what you feel. Others consider taboo kapag pinapakita mo yung kahinaan mo. So questions that may be natural to you can be intrusive to someone from a different culture. This needs to be considered before you can get a good bearing of the views and goals of the people you work with. So, aalamin mo ano ba yung pagtingin nila when it comes to disclosing yourselves to others. Are they more of considering na people who is very much open, who would really tell directly kung ano nararamdaman nila? Or are they kind of people na, oh, sige, work lang tayo. Wag mong ipasok kung ano man yung dapat na ipasok sa usapan. Plainly work lang tayo. Ganun. So you really need to look into that. Different approaches to knowing. So different cultures have different ideas when it comes to gaining knowledge. So for instance, Europeans consider information gained through counting and measuring more valuable than other means. Some African cultures rely on knowledge gained through symbolic imagery, while some Asian cultures emphasize the validity of knowledge gained through transcendence. So tinitingnan, iba-iba rin yung pamamaraan para malaman ang isang impormasyon o para matuto ang isang individual sa isang kultura. So, how are we going to relate that in terms of the challenges with the way we communicate? So, by just simply, again, understanding their way of knowing. Paano ba nila inaalam? Paano ba sila natututo? Paano ba nila pinag-aaralan ng isang bagay? So, kasi dito halimbawa sa atin sa Philippines, we validate yung knowledge. Pero parang hindi na nangyayari yung parang nawawala na yung validity. Kasi ang nagiging kultura na talaga natin ngayon kung ano yung may maraming likes, yung maraming share, yun yung pinaniniwalaan natin. Which is unlike with researching, verifying, cross-checking the contents. Nako, nasa kultura na nating mga Pilipino na dahil lagi yun ang sinishare, maraming likes at maraming mga followers, okay, legit na tong sinasabi niya. So, nagkaroon na tayo ng ganong way of knowing, way of understanding things, way of believing things. Okay, because of the influence of social media, which I'm actually do not want that kind of behavior. So we still need to research to verify and cross-check the information that is shared in the social media. Okay, so those are the things that you have to look into account when you are now communicating culture and then inculturating communication. So communicated, we just like to end it on that statement, communicating culture and inculturating through communication. Because again, as we look into it, we shared things, we shared thoughts, we shared views from others through communication. And as we share all these things, we share culture. Okay, that leads to enculturating communication. Enculturating, enculturation through communication. Thank you.